What is up guys, it is Ross, and you guys really seem to enjoy the two-part video I made a few months ago about the timeline of Mario Kart Wii Limitless. I've been sitting on a follow-up video for a few months, wondering what topic I should cover next, and eventually I had the bright idea of covering one of the vehicles and how they've fared over the course of Limitless's development. These vehicles have a lot of history to them, so I wanted to start off with one that has had a relatively simple journey, and in the end I settled on Standard Kart S. What a fitting vehicle to kick things off with, huh? Since Mario Kart Wii Limitless is a balancing mod first and foremost, I will mainly be covering the vehicle's history and competitive play, but I will go into detail describing its stats and attributes for context on what the vehicle's identity is supposed to be whenever appropriate. Welp, strap in everyone, as we delve into episode 3 of The Legend of Mario Kart Wii Limitless, the Standard Kart S. The Standard Kart S started off with some very balanced attributes across the board. For context, the initial balance philosophy behind all of the standard vehicles is that their stat spreads and playstyles were very similar, as a way for players to have a viable way of having a uniform playstyle across all three weight classes, though their stat spreads leaned into the areas each weight class specialised in just enough for players to be able to prefer one over the others. In the case of Standard Kart S, it had above average cornering and accelerating abilities, but below average speed and weight, befitting its status as a lightweight. The stat line that Standard Kart S boasted remained relatively consistent during the alpha period, which is surprising given the amount of balance patches that dropped during this time frame, but the lack of changes made to the Standard Kart S throughout its alpha career was emblematic of a consistent vehicle. And a consistent vehicle Standard Kart S was. Admittedly, it started off fairly slow, owing to it being, well, just that, slow, in an environment where the speedy Corsa vehicles were utterly dominant, while similarly powerful speed demons such as Mach Bike, Bullet Bike, Flameflyer, and Sneakster were also in fairly high demand. The earliest alpha patches are typically regarded as being among Limitless' worst versions in terms of actual balance, as the sheer gap between vehicles in some stats meant that the specialised speed vehicles rose to dominate, which generally pushed the well-rounded generalist vehicles into the lower tiers, with some rare exceptions. Standard Kart S was sadly not one of these exceptions, though as its speed stat was above average compared to the likes of Offroader, it was considered among the better choices if, for whatever reason, a player was in need of a jack-of-all-trades playstyle. Limitless started seeing patches, and vehicles got rebalanced in due course. The specialist vehicles that dominated early alpha were given some pretty sizable nerfs over the patches, not least among them the Corsa trio, and with their overpowered running abilities being less dominant, more so became their weaknesses of extreme perishability should mistakes happen, and we all know how often those show up in Mario Kart Wii. With this in mind, generalist vehicles began slowly climbing the ranks, which included the standard karts, intriguing considering their relative lack of changes. Their shifts in viability slowly began to make more sense as time went on, however. Their acceleration and handling stats allowed them to secure decent placings in races and rebound should things go south, and which member of the trio capitalised on said acceleration and handling abilities the most? Standard Kart S, of course. But what about its weight, which enabled it to get badly bullied by the big boys, or its sluggish speed, which seldom secured superb showings? What about those flaws? With generalist vehicles rising to prominence, Standard Kart S suddenly had newer competition. Gone were the Honeykoops, the Sprinters and the Mach Bikes, and replacing them were the Booster Seats, the Super Bloopers and the Dolphin Dashers, all of which Standard Kart S happened to outclass in the speed department. Its weaknesses at power playing meant very little when the vehicles it would be pitted against were even worse at doing so in most cases. And sure, the occasional specialist would crop up here and there to ruin Standard Kart S's day, but the newfound emphasis on their poor recoveries didn't bode well in lobbies where most players would be able to tank hits left and right. You gotta have some staying power to back up such running prowess. So where did Standard Kart S go competitively? Well, it took a little minute to catch on, but the moment it did, it became a metagame staple pretty much overnight on behalf of two players consistently using it to great success in tournament matches. Those players being Whimsy and Cogmomain, with the two frequently making runs well into the top Kart S, despite both players boasting very varied vehicle lineups otherwise. Notably, Cog took 4th place in Season 0's 9th official tournament using primarily Standard Kart S, and followed it up in the following week's tourney with a 3rd place finish using the vehicle exclusively, and the deep bracket runs of both players combined cemented the Standard Kart S's position well within the top 5 in vehicle usage. The jury was still out on exactly how effective Standard Kart S was during this time frame, and admittedly it had heavy competition in the form of its medium-weight older cousin, but its smaller hitbox and superior mid-pack prowess was typically seen as a point in S's S's favour, with M's calling card of additional speed not being too important in a metagame where Standard Card S would already outspeed most relevant threats. With such a favourable environment coupled with strong competitive showings proving its worth, Standard Card S had definitely made its mark on the player base, with pretty much everybody agreeing that it was at least a top 10 threat, with some even going further and claiming it had an argument for top 5. The tail end of Season 0 would see a slight decline in its success, however, for the final alpha patch saw not only the Standard Card trio get nerfed, which in fairness didn't impact Standard Card S's viability that much considering Cog and Whimsy's impressive showings were post-nerf, but also the buffing of several vehicles, including the dreaded Corsas that dominated early alpha. Thus they managed to see a resurgence towards the end of the season. With specialist vehicles on a bit of a comeback, this caused the dominion of generalists to gradually lessen, thus emphasizing the slow nature of the Standard Card S once more. The real kicker was not a buff to a particular vehicle, however, but rather a shocking discovery. Performance transmission vehicles that have high top speeds but lose speed gradually while turning, can cheese their intended drawback by abusing the passive handling buffs of automatic mode to tap turn, ensuring that they keep their speed. This discovery caused the Blue Falcon, formerly an innocuous high tier, to suddenly become the single most defining vehicle in the mod, with multiple players swiftly switching to the Falcon carrier in an effort to push their competitive capabilities to their absolute limit. Unfortunately, the two biggest driving forces behind the Blue Falcon renaissance happen to be the same exact players that catapulted the Standard Card S into stardom, Cog and Whimsy. While its competitive prowess had already been proven, the fact that Standard Card S saw its usage drop off a cliff like that is a tough pill to swallow indeed. In any case, the Standard Card S had gotten off to a spectacular start in Mario Kart Wii Limitless, managing to be one of the most defining vehicles of the alpha period for a good chunk of its existence, and still remaining strong, if a little overshadowed, right to the end. The Standard Card S became somewhat of an afterthought upon the mod's official publication. During the transition, it didn't change much beyond a speed nerf of roughly 2 kmh, which stung a lot less when you consider the fact that there was a universal speed nerf making the rounds. That being said, V1's competitive climate became infamous for its centralizing nature, as the best of the best vehicles were extremes in their respective archetypes, and the tracklist from this time period certainly accelerated things, so it didn't take long at all for the top tiers to start making life miserable for the many vehicles not within their little clique. To simplify this phenomenon, usually the more centralized the metagame becomes, the harder it gets for all-arounders to thrive, as a centralized metagame revolves around vehicles being able to either 1. Excel in whichever trait the metagame favours, an act which all-arounders will inherently never be able to do, or 2. Be able to adapt to such strategies as best as they can, which didn't quite happen with Standard Card S, try as it might. In fact, of the 3 standard cards, it's widely agreed that S got hit the hardest, as it just wasn't as fast and didn't have as much staying power to allow itself to keep up like Standard Card M or Standard Card L could, while its trademark maneuverability wasn't doing it much favours in a metagame where Sprinter and Sugarscoot were running amok. That all said and done, Standard Card S's versatility remained a legitimate asset, and it had a few tricks left up its sleeve, which ironically allowed it to trend upwards during the tail end of the season where most other generalists trended downwards as more and more players turned to duck abuse. Cog swiftly dropping the vehicle in favour of Cheap Charger during Season 1's opening tournament was not a good sign of things to come, neither was the fact that its representation was null and void for the 2 months that followed, but eventually players such as Lucio Wins, Exterion and old reliable Whimsy started to use it to moderate success in the tournaments leading up to the season's end, proving that the Standard Card S's niche, while small, was legitimate. It may not have had any defining traits to put to use in the patch that arguably enabled such traits the most, and it didn't have the greatest of stats to fall back on, but the Standard Card S's efficacy and pack play allowed it to remain a solid mid-tier choice, ranking at 22nd on the official V1 community tier list. Standard Card S inexplicably got its speed stat lowered again going into V2. To be fair, many cards got this treatment, and the nerfs Standard Card S received were child's play considering the numerous nerfs nonchalantly niggling at the Jet Setter, Honeycomb, Sprinter, Blue Falcon and Mini Beast. There is one major distinction between the vehicles just listed in Standard Card S, however. Those vehicles were consistently great in V1, being considered high tier at absolute minimum, whereas Standard Card S was average on a good day. Adding insult to injury is that the majority of cards considered weaker than the Standard Card S in V1 enjoyed some very generous buffs in V2, not least of which being eventual metagame staples Flameflyer and Day Tripper, leaving the Standard Card S in the dust. But it's not all that bad. Sure, the individual changes may have been a little harsh, but V2 was more balanced than V1, right? Less centralized metagame, more room for all-rounders, that sort of thing. Surely this would allow the Standard Kart S to receive some form of competitive relevance. Well, that would probably have been the case, were it not for the significant buffing of the standard bike trio. Indeed, the dirt bike saw a lot of love going into V2, which allowed them to firmly corner the market on the jack-of-all-trades playstyle, and with speed vehicles gradually being phased out of V2's metagame in favour of turbo vehicles, the standard bikes, L in particular, only saw their competitive prospects improve as the season went on, due to the inherent speed-based nature of bikes compared to the mini-turbo-based nature of karts. A bad time to be a Standard Kart fan it was. Standard Kart S being completely devoid of any competitive niche became readily apparent in Season 2's competitive scene. On the tournament side of things, it was firmly ranked in the bottom 5 in terms of vehicle usage, and in the brand new LTRC format it had no notable results to speak of. It clung to mid-tier by a thread, but that was largely owed to the gap between the perceived viability between the mid-tiers and the low-tiers, and the improved balance of V2 compared to V1 meant that the bar for mediocrity was not a high one to climb in the least, ultimately ranking as a bottom 5 vehicle in V2.1's official community tier list. Standard Kart S's rather milquetoast playstyle and stat lines were addressed going into V3. Not that there was anything wrong with its identity up until this point, but a fresh new take on the vehicle was much appreciated considering the standard karts had effectively been synonymous with each other ever since Limitless' inception. So what big change did the Standard Kart S receive to make it stand out? 2 words: hybrid drift. With a lowered drift angle, Standard Kart S doesn't swing out nearly as much, allowing it to emulate the unique hybrid style of drifting present in Mario Kart 8, hence the name Hybrid Drift. The Standard Kart S's drift style and stat spread particularly reminded players of the lightweight playstyles present in the older Mario Kart games, which was kind of novel considering how the Standard Kart L got the opposite treatment. In terms of casual play, this rework was one of the best things that could have happened to the vehicle. Finally, one of the mod's blandest vehicles has a unique and fun quirk to use, and a lot of players expressed interest in picking the vehicle up. Unfortunately, the same could not be said for Standard Kart S's standing on the other side of the casual versus competitive spectrum, as its trademark jack-of-all-trades stat spread was really starting to become a hindrance now, being at odds with its new identity. It was bad enough that the lower drift angle forced players to relearn their driving lines as snaking became a bit more complicated, but with hybrid drift, Standard Kart S was now placed in direct competition with Super Blooper and Blue Falcon, 2 players that didn't swing out much when drifting, or even at all in the case of the latter, and thus had limited mobility and snaking options compared to other karts. The reason this was an issue for Standard Kart S was that it didn't have any X factors to compensate for its difficulty in snaking, in contrast to Super Blooper's insane mini turbo length and Blue Falcon's immaculate base speed, nor did it have any way to patch this gameplay flaw up. Super Blooper's aforementioned mini turbos overwrote its turn speed, which allowed it to realign on a dime, and while Blue Falcon also couldn't really mitigate its lack of snaking capability, this was a weakness it was balanced around anyway, so it was no big deal. Even if it wasn't so blatantly outshone by similar drifting vehicles, the fact that it was an all-rounder in a metagame ruled by booster seat would have sealed its fate regardless. Standard Kart S's awkward playstyle and newfound competition caused its competitive usage to stagnate once more, and in a mid-season player questionnaire which doubled as a mid-season tier list, Standard Kart S found itself being singled out by many players as being the worst vehicle in the patch, a crying shame as many players cited the vehicle as being genuinely fun to use in spite of its unique turning. Not all was lost for Standard Kart S though, as for the first time since the mod went public, Limitless received its first official mid-season balance patch, with the intent on toning down vehicles that proved too dominant, while simultaneously giving a helping hand to those that were struggling in the lower tiers, and Standard Kart S was one of the vehicles that got buffed the most, seeing a fairly sizable speed buff, putting it much more up to par with the sport karts that dominated the pre-patch metagame, as well as the standard bikes which had its number for a good while now. It also enjoyed a turning speed buff which gave players who struggled with its method of snaking a bit more to fall back on, and arguably the most impactful buff of all, a 4-frame boost to its mini turbo duration, making its turbo chaining much more rewarding. It was a pretty modest glow up in the grand scheme of things, with its competitive player base remaining somewhat small, but any progress is good progress. Its ability to blossom was somewhat nipped in the bud by Blue Falcon enjoying buffs of similar magnitude, causing it to soar up the tier list overnight, and Booster Seat, while nerfed, remained the undisputed #1 vehicle in the game, with Standard Kart S's statistical similarity rendering it inferior once again. But these buffs were enough to reverse the Standard Kart S's misfortunes for the first time in almost a full year at this point, even if it remained on the rare side competitively. In the main division of tournaments in LTRC, that is. While lower division events were less stacked in general, Standard Kart S saw significant success in the 8th Division B tournament of Season 3, courtesy of, who else, Whimsy. Now, Whimsy's rotation of vehicles is incredibly varied for the lower level standards of Division B, with the majority of the player base being one-trick ponies, so the Standard Kart S is not the big driving force behind his wins or anything. However, this particular tournament showing is worthy of mention due to the fact that it paved the way for Whimsy to score a perfect GP, getting first place every single race he used the Standard Kart S in. This is even more impressive considering low div events rarely have more than 4 entrants, and tournament number 8 had, you guessed it, 4 entrants. With minimal chaos going on during the races, it would be an uphill battle for such a mid-pack focused vehicle to hold its own, and yet Standard Kart S did just that in spectacular fashion. Sadly, this breakout performance was not enough to net Whimsy the win this time, and it would be the extent of his usage of the vehicle this particular season, but it's safe to say that the Standard Kart S could leave its mark, if nowhere else, in the lower leveled environment of Division B. Season 4 is still playing out as we speak, with the competitive circuit ending a few weeks from now as of the time of writing this script, but I still think there have been enough developments in the metagame to warrant a section on it in this video. What developments, you ask? Well, the Standard Kart trio ate big time going into Season 4, and the Standard Kart S was nary an exception, to the point where it's tentatively the best it's ever been. Playstyle wise, there really isn't much to elaborate on, as it's the same song and dance from its rework back in V3, though there were some generous quality of life changes made, such as a buff to its speed stat, moving it up to a perfect 88 flat. The universal acceleration nerf was a mild inconvenience, but that's okay because the metagame around the Standard Kart S shifted to the point where it contextually became among the best acceleration stats in the meta. Initially, Standard Kart S was seen as the weaker of the trio once more. Standard Kart M saw immediate success in both tournament and LTRC, due to it being the ultimate jack of all trades, blending well with its versatile and fundamental driving style, and the Wild Wing's significant nerfs meant the Standard Kart M's speed buff really shone through, now being much faster relative to one of the fastest threats in the game. Standard Kart L, meanwhile, enjoyed high stocks fairly early on in the patch, doubly so after a hotfix nerfed Flameflyer down a peg, with both vehicles being much closer in terms of potential, with Standard Kart L's mid-pack advantage giving it the upper hand in the eyes of many players. Standard Kart S didn't stack up quite as favourably compared to its immediate competition, causing it to get overlooked. Nowadays, however, Standard Kart S is commonly touted as being a highly versatile member of Season 4's top tier, embodying the strengths the Standard Karts have to offer to the absolute fullest extent, and is typically regarded as being the best of the bunch. V4's metagame is a mixture of both top speed and mid-pack versatility with regards to the ideal attributes vehicles should spec into, with Phantom, Corsas and Zip Zip occupying the former niche, while the Standard Karts have firmly cornered the market on the latter. But how come Standard Kart S is considered the best of the trio if it's got the least speed, considering speed is such an important trait in V4? Wouldn't that make the Standard Kart S the weakest of the three? I hear you ask. And the true answer is a bit more complicated. Standard Kart M and Standard Kart L have significant merit in their speed advantage, yes, but they are still standard karts at the end of the day. Their value comes in taking hits and making the most of their maneuverability, not commanding the pack. They're sacrificing stat points in their trademark mid-pack prowess in favour of boosting their running abilities, something that they will inherently struggle to do against all of the Phantoms, Honeykoops and Sprinters running around. Standard Kart S's slower speed stings a lot less, and leaning the hardest into acceleration and cornering allows it to do its job better than either of its elder siblings could ever hope to. The metagame generally trending in favour of vehicles with low mini-turbo stats is also a blessing for Standard Kart S, as its decent, but unspectacular, mini-turbo stat suddenly skyrockets in value, not too dissimilar to its acceleration stat in the wake of V4's universal nerfs, being among the highest of all of the metagame staples, thus ironically giving it genuine merit as a front-running threat in a roundabout sort of way. Even without the wider context of the metagame, Standard Kart S holds up very well statistically. The only stats it's lower than Standard Kart M in are speed, weight and off-road, the former and latter of which are such small differences as to basically be negligible. Standard Kart S's usage in competitive play throughout Season 4 has largely reflected the community's consensus on it at any given point in Season 4's lifespan. Early on, its success was modest at best, but in recent times players have used it a good amount in all echelons of competitive play, whether it be Lucia Wins and BB using it in their arsenals in the 11th tournament of the season, Whimsy continuing to make waves down in Division B, or the Super Artist Gamer putting it to very effective use in LTRC. Will the Standard Kart S continue to make a splash, or will there be a late metagame trend that will knock it down a couple of pegs? That remains to be seen, but as it stands currently, Standard Kart S is in an incredible spot in V4.1, even if it took a little while for players to realise its true potential. Standard Kart S has had a rocky road throughout Limitless to say the least, being a top tier and a bottom tier at various different points of the mod's lifespan. When the mod was at its most unbalanced, Standard Kart S struggled significantly, but as the patches rolled out it got better and better as mid-pack play became much more valued, becoming one of Alpha's foremost threats, for a time anyway. The centralised metagames of V1 and to a lesser extent V2 caused it to take a bit of a back seat, though it wasn't awful and it remained in mid-tier. In V3 it received a rework, for better or for worse, and a slew of buffs going into the mid-season balance patch, turning what was once V3's definitive bottom tier into a solid threat once more. And finally, in the present day, Standard Kart S is one of the best vehicles one could ask for once again, and it doesn't appear to be slowing down anytime soon. A fairly grand adventure for such a small vehicle. I would like to thank everybody who watched/listened to this installment of Ross Rambles. If there are any other topics pertaining to Mario Kart Wii Limitless that you would like to hear me cover, please let me know in either the comments or in the official Mario Kart Wii Limitless Discord server. Link is in the description. With that being said, thank you so much for watching, and this is Ross, signing off.